So thank you guys for joining us today for breakfast. And for those who do not know me, I am James Fields, the president and co-CEO of Klingenstein Fields Advisors. I'd like to welcome you today for a lively discussion on family philanthropy. I hope you've had a chance to enjoy breakfast already. If you need anything, do not hesitate to step outside and ask one of the servers. At Klingenstein Fields Advisors, giving is an area that we feel strongly about, both as individuals and as a firm. Our professionals support a range of causes. We serve on boards, and we often give our time as volunteers. Whether it's responding to natural disasters such as hurricanes in Florida or wildfires in California, wanting to support an educational institution, helping further medical research, or supporting another worthwhile cause, the importance of supporting our communities across the country resonates strongly with many of us. Philanthropy is also one of the things that can bring families together, regardless of generation, stage of life, or other beliefs. Crafting a plan that your entire family can embrace can be challenging, but ultimately very rewarding. With us this morning to discuss this topic are Bess White, MPH MS, founder of Bluebird Philanthropy Advisors, and Shamari Gilliard, one of my partners, CFP and head of wealth planning at Klingenstein Fields Advisors. So now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Shamari to start things off. We would like this to be interactive discussion and hope you will ask questions and volunteer your thoughts on family experiences. If you do have a question or comment, we are going to record this, so just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, James. We really appreciate everyone coming out. It's really nice to see you all. I didn't realize we'd be perched up so high here. I feel like those Muppets who were laughing in the balcony all the time. But going back to what James said, giving back to the community is definitely an activity that's near and dear to our hearts in terms of the firm itself. An activity that I feel particularly committed to personally is mentoring, both through my alma mater and through other organizations. Each individual and family is different when it comes to philanthropy. What works for one might not work for another. We are really pleased today to have here Bess White, who has worked with individuals and families seeking to grow their philanthropy. Bess has served on the board of her family's foundation, where she worked to develop a strategy to align family giving with family values. Bess has also been involved in fundraising, developing partnerships between nonprofits and donors to maximize gift impact. She is executive director of elderabuse.org, a foundation supporting elder justice and elder abuse prevention, and is head of special projects in geriatric and palliative medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine. Bess has guest taught courses on fundraising at Columbia University and recently completed her master's in public health and PH degree at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health, learning evidence-based frameworks to further reach to further the reach of philanthropy and nonprofit organizations. So Bess, it's a pleasure to have you here today. I look forward to our discussion. I thought we would get started with discussing how to determine where an individual or family might want to give. Often when I'm discussing wealth planning and philanthropy with clients, their giving has grown somewhat organically over the years. So there's a range of causes that they support, which may or may not be the most effective way of giving, but they're at a loss in how to determine where to give and what to do. What type of advice would you have for them?
So thank you, Shamari. Thank you, James, for having me. It's such a pleasure to get to talk about this topic. It's a really important one. And I think, we talk a lot about how we can grow our wealth, but talking about how we give it away intentionally is sometimes left to the side. And like you say, it does grow organically a lot of times. Generally, how this starts is we start to give to an organization that we have an experience with, that we're close with. Like, if you were to think about the organizations that you currently support, if thinking through it in your mind, it's probably going to be an educational organization, a healthcare organization, and possibly a religious institution. And if any of these were true for you, That's because they're true for most affluent individuals. Those are the top 3 areas that are supported by wealthy individuals and donors. And it makes sense. Education, you're supporting your alma mater. For healthcare, perhaps you had a good experience at a hospital, a medical research institution, that's why you're going to give there. And for those who are religious, giving to a synagogue or church, there's a long tradition of that. And it's great. What happens, though, over time is that you just sort of end up giving by default to different places. And when it comes to sort of involving other family members who may not have those ties, how do you then get them involved in philanthropy? They don't feel that connection. So what I'm hoping to talk about today is how can you take these different places that you're giving to and think about them instead of through this framework of these places that I'm connected with as an individual, and more, what is it about these places from a values perspective that's so important to me? And can I find values that I have in common with my child, my grandchild, and then step back and build philanthropy from there?
That's great. So, as a firm, we've always talked about giving in terms of mission, resources, structure, and strategy. So thinking about, in terms of your own personal giving, what your values are, just as you said, those core values, driving, trying to hone categories across the board. Next, it's the resources. What exactly are you going to give? Is it going to be, time? Is it going to be, money? And then getting to a point where you're preparing a plan to actually execute. So on top of that, of the where to give, it's also the what to give, as I said. So in some cases that may be a cash gift. In other cases, it may be your energy and effort. In some cases, it's tangible personal property. It might be volunteer work. You might be advocating for a cause. So Bess, another issue that we often face is how to involve multiple generations. So often these generations, they have different viewpoints on what types of causes they want to support and how they want to support them. At the same time, families want to make sure what they are doing is sustained beyond generation 1 and 2, potentially 3 and beyond. Have you seen this in your work?
Yeah, so this is something that it's so typical how this comes up. And this is what I'd like to kind of share what happened with my own family's foundation, because I don't want to say that we've solved the problem, because families are dynamic and complex, and looking for a moment of true peace is probably not going to happen. But what we did to sort of help guide our philanthropy was we looked at all the organizations that we were supporting and how we were doing it, again, in this very ad hoc way. Some family members would have a certain cause they supported, and it was kind of all over the place. And what we did was we each as individuals thought about, okay, why do I give to these organizations? And then even more broadly than that, doing some exercises and thinking about what matters to me most. So, for instance, when I personally have maybe been at a crossroads in my life and made a big decision, what was it about that decision? Like, what drove me there? Was it because, taking this different path in life, let's say in business, for example, did I do it because I thought that it would, increase joy? Did I take a higher paying, but more difficult job because wealth and the security around wealth is important to me? Is creativity something that's important to me? If I'm pursuing perhaps music lessons, things like that define me as a person. And then each of us individually writing down, okay, here are the things that are my personal values. And then getting together as a family and seeing, do any of these values overlap, or could they at least be in the same sort of theme or category? So for our family, the things that really stood out amongst all of us were an interest in the arts, so creativity. We all were interested in achievement, whether that be through academic achievement, supporting an organization that was at the forefront of research. Then one of them was responsibility. That can mean different things to different people. So for instance, for my sister, who is really interested in social justice causes, she felt a personal responsibility to her community. So that's how she views responsibility. Some other older people in our family foundation viewed it as personal responsibility. That's okay, as long as it's something that is a value that we can say we all share it. And then finally, the last one was empathy. So with these different values in mind, you revisit the organizations that you're giving to, and you want to make sure that each organization is at least hitting one of those values. And that's how we talk about what the work is that's being done by the organization. So even if it's an organization that perhaps one family member may be like, I don't really agree with what they're doing, and I don't like it, and maybe normally we just wouldn't give to it, or that person might be uncomfortable with it. Okay, perhaps you personally would not give money to it, but if we can think about it in the context of what this organization is doing to support a value that we've all decided that we find important, it's a way to get everyone feeling more on board and also more engaged with the giving itself. And just to pull that a little forward about how you engage with an organization, one thing that we know is that younger people are much more interested in volunteering with organizations and being more boots on the ground, getting to know the organization. And families should take advantage of that, because there's no better way to get to know an organization, especially a new one, than being out there with them and seeing them do their work. And having sort of eyes on the work being done, and having that younger person being able to report back on how the work is being done. It helps get them involved in giving, and it also brings really important information to your family.
No, that's a great answer. Just in terms of generational differences and thinking about preference and what you support, there's definitely folks who are out there who prefer like the community that's closest to them. They're thinking about their synagogue or church or maybe a neighboring school. Other people take like more of a global impact view of things. There's some people who have a preference for like immediate aid, while others, again, are thinking more long-term in terms of time. And there's folks who, like James mentioned, might prefer a specific cause that has popped up, like disaster relief, versus some of the overarching themes that you mentioned around like education and healthcare and poverty and hunger, environmental causes, so on and so forth. In terms of just life stage difference, I've done some reading about this, and it seems that in terms of like baby boomers, in thinking about preferences again on the giving, they tend to give to a smaller number of charities. They give more money, as you'd imagine. They have more money. They're more likely to include a charity in their estate planning. When you look at like millennials, you look at Generation X, you look at Gen Z, they give more frequently. The amounts are much smaller. They are more about like impact of the charity itself, and they tend to do more research around the charity in terms of transparency. So just moving on, related to the previous topic, I often find that the patriarch and matriarch, they want the next generation involved in decision making, but also wish to retain some measure of control. Is there a structure that you would have found to be the most effective in establishing a family philanthropy board?
So this idea of control, again, that's something that, I think it's going to happen. When you've got a matriarch or patriarch and they're the ones who are providing the wealth for the private foundation, for the giving, they're naturally going to feel like they should have a say in how it's being given. And that, was certainly our experience as well. In our family foundation, how things worked for a long time was that the person who was bringing the funds to give away was the chairman. And at the end of the day, we had a lot of discussions around giving, but it was very clear that that person was the decision maker. And ultimately, that was undermining one of the reasons that we were hoping, to do this in the first place, which was to sort of have a nice time for our family to get together and talk about money in a way that would feel more positive. And instead, what it was doing was sort of bringing up the same sort of money dynamics that had existed elsewhere, which comes to things of, power, control, a lot of the more negative sides of wealth that can pop up from time to time. And now it was just sort of moving into our philanthropy talk, and it was really unfortunate. So one of the things there are a lot of things you can do, and it's extremely family specific. Every family has their own dynamics. Every family is different. Every family has its own unique dysfunction. I've heard that the only family that's not dysfunctional is a family of one member, and then that's it. So, so there's no broad-based answer, but I think first of all, again, I know that I'm kind of beating a drum on this family values conversation, but I think doing things that can kind of shift perspective on what you're trying to achieve can be really helpful. So if you have something where you can come together and all be on the same page about these fundamental things that mean something to your specific family, it makes it so that it feels much more collaborative. It makes the reporting of the use of funds more collaborative because people feel like this is the organization that I'm giving to, or we are giving to as a family. I'm going to be the one reporting on the use of the funds to the family. I think switching up roles, if you can, that's one of the things that we did. We now take turns. One year I'll be the treasurer. Then a few years later, I may be the chairman. Then the second, just having that flexibility. It was hard to get there. I'm not going to lie, trying it, at first it was done as an experiment to just see. But there are certain ways that you can shift things around enough within the dynamic of a board to make it feel a little bit, to make those, especially the younger ones, who know that they're not giving the money. They know that they're there because someone else has given the money. They know that and a lot of them know this money could have been their inheritance, and now we're using it to give away to other organizations. They need to be a part of that conversation, and they need to feel like their voice is being heard.
I love that. So I think about this in terms of like informal and formal. So, and you've actually personally done both. So the idea of like a senior generation coming to like adult children, asking for their feedback on giving, and speaking about what the family has done in the past, and potentially looking for other causes or names to which they could give to. And then the more formal is like the mechanisms, right? It's thinking about like, so how are we going to do this? Is it going to be like a donor advised fund? Are we going to do like a family foundation? And there's differences between those two in terms of not only typically the size of the gift, but in potential administrative responsibility, right? So, and I'm sure people in the room might have one or the other or both. That's something that I think we deal with, those two mechanisms probably the most when we're talking about this sort of thing. A donor advised fund is for those who don't know, is really just a tax exempt account. An individual taxpayer can fund it with stock, with cash, get an immediate tax deduction. They don't have to make a decision today on where the grant from that account is going to be made. The account itself is growing over time, which is fantastic. And in thinking about a private foundation, it's usually something that is a much bigger amount. The starting amount for like a donor advised fund is quite nominal, but for a foundation usually can be quite high. It might be hundreds of thousands, it might be a couple $1 million. But the idea is more of like a legacy, lasting legacy for the family. There's a stated mission, there's potentially board of directors, there's tax filings. You have to distribute 5% of the funds every year. There's potential excise taxes, 2% on net investment income, so on and so forth. So there's big differences, and and thinking through again control and how folks can actually accomplish their goal. I think those two are interesting choices. So while taxes are not the primary motivator in giving. A strategy that considers tax consequences of different types of giving is something we always review with our clients. What have you found to be the case, and how do you address that concern from a non-financial planning point of view?
Yeah, so as someone on the fundraising side, I do just want to say that a close relationship with a wealth advisor on this is really critical, because no development person wants to be asked for financial advice on how people should be managing their money, or how much can they give away. So we really prefer, especially with donors who are considering making a larger gift, to work with their team, including their wealth planners, because giving away money is an important part of that overall strategy. And it's also helpful for someone on the side of development to know, what is this person at this moment even capable of giving? What sort of programming could they support? Because no one wants to go and ask for something that is just ask for a gift, spend the time developing a program or an ask around a program that's not going to be appropriate for what that donor can really do. So having that planning in place is really important, so that you also are aware of what you can give at any moment in time. And then also, if you're thinking seriously about donating to an organization at a higher level, so at a 5-figure, obviously 6-figure level, bringing in, development prefers to be able to speak with the professionals around you to make sure that what's being done, not only from an individual perspective, is interesting to the person and will be meaningful, but also makes sense for them financially as well. And just, on taxes, if you're fundraising, you don't really care at the end of the day what someone's motivation is necessarily. If someone is coming through the door because they would like a tax, they're working on their taxes, great. Because it gives us the opportunity to show you our work and what we're doing. And if you are at an organization that's doing good work, and you feel like anyone who comes through the door, you can demonstrate to them that we're doing work that is valuable, especially if it aligns with the value of your family, and we can have a year to show you, here's what we're doing, here's why we are really good at what we do, here's the impact that we're making in your community, great. And then maybe over time it will develop into taxes and something additionally meaningful. And on the flip side, maybe you're coming in because it is meaningful and taxes aren't a consideration, but in this country, we have a very unique tax structure that allows for a nonprofit sector to flourish. And because of that, I don't think there needs to be any shame in being motivated by, minimizing taxes. It's a fact.
It is, yes, I would agree. And, it's also funny because for any other advisors in the room, there's so many times where clients will come to us and say, it's like they want the secret sauce, right? They're like, okay, well, come up with something, in terms of charity where I'm going to get this massive benefit, right? So there's so many conversations I've had where it's like, if you don't have the charitable intent, I'm not sure this is the right thing for you, because to put it plainly, if you give away $100, you're never going to get $105 of benefit, right? Like the net, like it's going to be better if you hadn't given it all for you. Even I say that being a proponent of philanthropy and charitable giving, but in trying to describe to clients that you have to have an underlying, charitable intent for it to make sense. And if that is the case, there's a host of things we can do, right? We can use stock, as I said. We can make direct cash gifts. We've had clients do qualified charitable distributions directly from their IRA to a charity. A client can name a charity as beneficiary of a tax-deferred account. They can use insurance and naming the charity as a beneficiary. They can, as I said, use donor-advised funds, private foundations. They can do charitable trust, where they could get a split interest to themselves in terms of income and to charity, or vice versa. There's a lot on the table, including bequest that can be made in an estate plan. Tax-wise, there's definitely benefits across the board during life or after death. So moving on, there's no shortage of individuals or causes that are out there looking for major donors. How do you recommend vetting an individual organization to assess whether it is the one that is right for an individual or a family to support?
Yeah, so that's correct. Everyone is looking for a major gift out there. And so what I would say is don't, and I doubt that anyone in this room would do this, but leading with a major gift. Someone may approach you asking for a major gift, but if it's not an organization that you have a relationship with, I would say take the time to get to know them. So one of the best ways that you can do that is even just the first year, give a gift to a specific program that the organization does, something that the nonprofit can report back to you in a very clear way. So finding something very specific where when you're meeting with them, they say, here's what we're hoping to achieve in the next year with this gift. Here are the things that we're going to do with it. And then you see, how do they steward the gift with you? Do they check in? Do they give you updates? When the year is over, are they reaching out to you to either find a time to have lunch, to bring you in? Do they send a report? What is sort of the standard operating procedure of this nonprofit and how it takes care of its donors and keeps them feeling engaged? And after that year, hopefully you will have a sense of whether or not this is an organization that you want to commit more to, or potentially not. Or maybe you say, oh, let's do another year. But an organization that is looking for that level of support, that's not just money, that's a relationship. And you want to have a valuable relationship with that organization. Again, we're trying to think about philanthropy not just in terms of just sort of giving here and there to the different causes, but in ways that are really meaningful for you and your family. This is trying to use wealth in a way that is sort of turning values into real life impact. And so when an organization, especially one that's reaching out to you, you need to hit the pause button and give it a year or two to just see how they're working. And any organization would, if they are, worth their weight, they will absolutely understand that and want to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think we're in an interesting time where, there's actually charitable organizations out there that their main focus is actually to review other charitable organizations on your behalf. So you can go to like GuideStar.org. You can go to CharitableNavigator.org. You can go to GiveWell.org. These organizations allow you to check nonprofits, charities, check their tax status, check if they have any potential red flags in terms of filings or any admonishments over the years. It allows you to give with confidence. I agree with what Beth said. If it's a new charity and you don't know it very well, do some research. Probably start small, so you can get to know them a little bit better. You can see, in years to come, how they're going to not only utilize the funds, but also get back to you in terms of outreach.
And Maura, if I could just ask,
Please.
Beth, if you could give maybe an anecdote or an example with your work at Weill Cornell about someone who did go through that kind of program. I think it helps people understand the kinds of things you can ask for or can follow that might be helpful for the audience.
Sure, yeah. So, this is sort of the thing. It's interesting. There seems to be sort of like a black box around some of the ways that you can get involved with a nonprofit unless you're someone who feels comfortable really engaging with development and you're fortunate enough to have a good development officer. So, the stars do sort of align, but I will say at Weill Cornell, for instance, there are a lot of, first of all, we want to invite you in. From a development perspective, everyone who's on the development team believes that the work that's being done there, whether it's a researcher, a clinician, and someone who's educating medical students, it's great to fundraise for an organization like that because you believe in it and they're doing good work. So you want to bring people in. So there are a number of ways that even a first-time donor could really get to engage. So let's say that there is a certain disease possibly that a family member has experienced that perhaps runs in your family, and you are interested in seeing what it might be like to support that research. What you would want to do is not only, write a check, but you would want to be in touch with the development person that works with that researcher and say, hey, is it possible for me to have lunch with this person? Could I go see their lab someday? Can I see meet with them and the younger students who are working with them. These are things that development can make happen, and they're happy to make it happen. I think a lot of times we don't know on the other side is when we're giving to ask for it. But bringing someone in, that benefits everyone. Any good development officer knows that being able to get someone in and seeing the work can help build a relationship. If the work that's actually being done really does align with the interest of a donor, getting them in, there's nothing better than that. And I will say on the flip side, as a donor, getting to meet with the medical students whose scholarship you supported, for instance, getting to talk to the clinician that you're supporting about the work that they're doing this year and their goals for the year ahead. That could be a 1 hour, 1.5 hour lunch, but that can make all the difference on both sides. And there's been nothing more meaningful. I know for our family, we made a larger capital gift, and we met with some of the people. It was for a church. It was a roof issue, extremely very expensive for roof issues, but we got to go there to the building after it had been fixed, meet with different people at different levels, and talk to them and hear about the work that they were going to do. Now that they had this facility that was working, and the people also who were benefiting from it, and it takes it from writing a check and sort of intellectually knowing you're doing something good to actually seeing it in real life. And you also learn when you're in person about other potential things that you may be even more interested in just from being on site. So, yes?
I have a question along the same lines. With an organization like Weill Cornell, it's a big institution, they have a large development team. What about families who are looking to make a bigger impact for a smaller organization that might not, have those resources? How do you recommend families evaluate those types of charities?
It's a great question. And those, in a lot of ways, there's even more meaning possible when you give to those larger organizations, the smaller organizations, because you can really move the needle for them in really profound ways. I think with those, you need to really listen to what they're saying in terms of what they can do for you. I think being able to go to an organization like that, especially if there's a place in person or meeting with someone, to the extent that they have the time for you. But any organization, their executive director, the people on the ground, possibly someone who's benefited, being able to have an hour lunch with those people even better if it's on site, that will give you much more information just from that 1 hour of talking to them than you would get from reading any pamphlet, going on GuideStar, all of that. And that is something that's doable. That's not a heavy ask for them. The thing that I really get concerned about with smaller organizations and what we ask from them about how the gift is when we're asking for big reports, or we come in with our own metrics, and all of a sudden the money that we're wanting to use for the programming is actually being spent on some administrator's salary to write the report. So it could be a little counter, it's not as useful. But absolutely, I think engaging with organizations at different levels and different types of development teams or they've got an executive director who is the development person. I think with that, it's just you need to be a little bit more careful about how we ask for their time, because they just won't have that level of time that a large organization can give. Yeah.
So maybe one more quick question before we open it up to the floor. Bess, if I know what causes and organizations I want to support, how can I feel more knowledgeable and connected to the causes and perhaps help advance the causes to others?
So I've already talked about knowledge, getting to know them. I think, to the extent that you can meet with someone from the organization, that's huge. And then advancing the cause, that's a wonderful opportunity that people in this room have. If you're someone who can get to know an organization, give it a level that's meaningful for the organization, and then be a spokesperson for them and speak passionately, we are all not only people who give, but we're around other people who give. So your networks are really powerful. And so you being able to speak passionately to friends about an organization that you feel like is worthwhile, you're speaking to someone who could potentially also really move the needle for the organization. And so I think a lot of it is just doing your own work within your family of finding the organizations that really resonate with you, and then being a spokesperson for those organizations. And maybe it will resonate with other people as well. Maybe not, but for those who do, that as a nonprofit, they can't ask for anything more
Sure.
than you sort of vouching for them.
No, I agree completely, and I think that I would say that people should just reach out if they want to do more. I mean, if you call a charity and say, what else can I do? They're going to say, send more money.
Oh my God.
That's the first thing they're going to
Yeah.
do. But after that, there are, like you said, there's ways that you can volunteer. There's ways you can be an advocate for them, spread their message. Even if it's social media, you can speak to their staff. You can speak to other donors. Join donor advocacy groups.
Yeah, be on a board. I mean, that would be something for an organization that you feel really strongly about, obviously. But being on a board and bringing not only your checkbook but also your brain can be really valuable as well.
Yeah. So quickly, very quick plug. So if you're sitting here and you're saying, okay, well, this is something I need to work on, right? Wondering how we can help. Please reach out to us just offline. Whether you're identifying the assets that you potentially want to use for a gift, it's something where we can sit down with you. We have sat down with many clients, talked about a wealth plan, talked about tax efficiency, as I mentioned earlier. Speak to them about just the comfort of the gift itself, thinking about the gift in relationship to balance sheet even, right? Income, expenses, those sort of things. There are ways that we definitely can be creative. Bess obviously can help in terms of coordinating that family plan discussion. And maybe with that, we can just open it up. Can you help out, James, just in terms of the?
Sure.
Great. So if anyone has okay, great.
So let me just make one reminder, because one of my colleagues just reminded me. In your packets is an opportunity to give feedback, both, of course, about the MC. No, I'm just kidding. About our speakers today, about the venue, but all that kind of stuff, and we welcome that. We also recognize, we don't take it personally. Everybody has a busy life. We hope people stay, have some coffee, ask some questions, but if you do need to go, we do understand that. And you'll see one of our colleagues out in the hall. We have like a little parting gift for folks for attending today. So thank you with that. And with that, if people want to raise their hands, I'll bring the mic around.
I hope I can talk loud enough for without the mic, but not on this mic. I'm reading a lot about how the administration is shifting the nonprofit landscape, and how nonprofits are feeling particularly in panic for some of them. And I wonder from both of you, is that changing your advice to clients on how to give? And also, is that changing how families are thinking about the values when giving?
That's a good. Can I start? That's a really good question. So I think you're right. I think that this is probably a time where, in terms of the folks who are giving, charities need them more than ever to not only maintain what they're giving, but potentially bump it up because of situations like that. I think that anytime you're in an environment where people feel a little unsettled, they're nervous about the future, consumer confidence is maybe a little bit lower, they're less likely to go in their pocket and hand someone $1, right? That makes sense. When you think about the tax code itself, just out of curiosity, does anyone know when charitable deductions started? What year? Any guesses? So it was actually 1917. So the reason it started was because the tax rate was jacked up that year because of the war effort, and Congress was nervous that wealthy industrialists would actually stop giving. So they made a benefit for them to continue their philanthropy, right? And I think that's interesting, just in the case of the conversation, and reminding us that as a government, we have incentivize people to give for a reason because we think it is good for the public, and it's probably good for checks and balances in a way too, in shouldering some of that burden.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that there's a real urgency out there in all sectors. Even the health sector's taken a huge hit right now, and so I do a lot of program development. From that side, we are already, there are hiring freezes going on right now. Things like, and you can see the road ahead where a lot of grants are going to be down. So we are already thinking about how do we bring in additional philanthropy to meet a gap that is coming. So every nonprofit is thinking this way. A lot of boards, especially the very large foundations, have already had emergency meetings to look through the organizations that they support to reach out and see, do we need to fund you additionally this year, next year? I would say the best thing a philanthropist can do, especially to organizations you're already giving to, is to reach out to them and let them know that you plan to still either give it the same level for the next few years, if it's true, because they can plan, and then if there's any way that there is room for more growth, to let them know immediately, because these are people, they are sweating right now. So anything that you can do, like pledges, for instance, have even more value right now, because it'll, a 3 or 5 year pledge, because all of a sudden, like with any business, anything, you can plan when you know you can see out a few years. So that would be a recommendation. But yeah, overall, I think there's a really strong sense of urgency to locate funds that we used to rely on for the government, and finding it through philanthropy instead. That shift is happening.
Yeah, one thing I would add too is that being more specific on where you want your donations to go and support is probably more important than ever for that reason, rather than just making generalized gifts.
Absolutely.
Thanks for your question.
Hi, it's been a great program. Thank you. My name's Maura Laidlaw. I'm a lawyer, and I do help a fair amount of clients with making charitable bequests upon death. And I've had the experience of serving on single-purpose boards related to my practice area, but I'm presently serving on the board of the New York Community Trust, the Westchester Division. So I'm curious what your interaction has been and your thoughts on single-purpose entities and donations there versus to community trusts and who know the local community and can provide oversight and mentorship to the single-purpose charities that they're supporting, and just your perspective on it.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? Just the last part? You said
the oversight a community foundation can give to the money that they're donating to the single-purpose entities versus gifting directly to the single-purpose entities.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is, they're great. And I think it depends on you as an individual and your family and how much time you have to devote to thinking about where you want your charitable donations to go. A community trust is great because they already know the organizations, they've vetted them. If you know you want to help your community and don't have the time to do the due diligence with everyone, it can be extremely valuable. On the other hand, if you do know certain organizations you want to give to or get to know a little more, then going your own route, especially if you do have the time and interest, I think it's really kind of where you are in your sort of philanthropic journey. And if you're trying to have a family foundation that's really accomplishing giving things away, but also more. There's the family foundation gives away money, but there's also a really strong value component for a family in terms of coming up with what do we think about in terms of what matters to us as a family? And do we want to have a few times a year where we all get together and sit around a table and talk about what matters to us, and then develop individual relationships with the nonprofits that align with these values. So I think it's just I don't think there's better or worse. I think it's just sort of different.
Thanks, Bess. It's great. I'm Helen Miller. I do some similar work to Bess, but one of the things, I was lucky enough to serve on the board of a donor-advised fund, the National Philanthropic Trust, so reviewed all the grants and where they were given, which was always an interesting process. And thank you for pointing out they only give away the 5% a year, so That's an important point, I think, as well. But one of the things I've found is organizations, I like to be the undercover, like there was the person who went to restaurants. And so I would suggest also that donors often call in or act like they're the client and calling in to see what services. And I'll give you an example. A large museum right now does one for dementia. But if you go online and do what they do and ask to put in that you want to come in and what you want to do, it took a month and nobody responded. So, and I called the doctor's office so then the development office finally got involved because I called them, but it's not a place that the donor would want to give because the individuals can't get processed. And I called the doctor's office once I represent different clients, and I called up and said, this family's interested in giving in their particular area, and the first thing the doctor said to me was, unless it's $1 million, I'm not interested. They didn't ask how much was it, and that person could have given $1 million. So I think it's also important to think about not just from the level of, someday I hope you'll read about me being an undercover cop for the nonprofit world to see, but go in as the client, I think is a really important thing for people, and that's why your point about volunteering or your point about getting to know them first is a really important way. I always say the donor is usually next to you. And often people don't know who that donor is, and they're in your own backyard. So think about that if you're the organization you're working with and looking at funding.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on the topic of engaging the next generation and share a story. My Florida colleague and I, Mike, were at a recent luncheon by the Community Foundation of Palm Beach, and they recognized a couple who have been long supporters of the organization, and they talked about how they went about engaging the next generation. And I think the story would relate to many of us. They said at their Thanksgiving dinner, where we've all had it, where you go around the table and said, what are you thankful for? They put it to their family that year's donation, they weren't going to decide where the money goes. They were going to take that pot of money and split it to all the children and grandchildren, that they had to go find an organization, do the research, and present it to the parents. So it's an interesting way of engaging the next generation on a topic that I think, again, in Thanksgiving, it was a perfect time, and it was a great story that they shared with the participants.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Thank you for this great discussion. So my question is about aligning family values to organizations, because on the one hand, at a high level, I think it's a pretty straightforward exercise. But then if you dig deeper into some organizations, what you'll often find, I think, is that your values may align with the organization broadly and its mission, but you may disagree with policies, practices, governance, management at the organization. And what we've seen, I think, over the last few years, maybe more publicly than in the past, is that people deal with it two different ways. Either you double down and you continue to give your gift and try to figure out a way to have a voice in that organization, to try to just, whether it's on the board or in an advisory committee, or people say, I'm not going to give, and make it very public or private, and send a message to the organization. So it's trying to change an organization that you care about through not giving, right? And so my question is just, as you have talked to families or thought about philanthropy and thought about this dilemma, any sort of advice or wisdom that you have in terms of different approaches, and then if you do double down on giving, how do you try to make sure that your voice is heard?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and it is hard. And I think these sort of internal struggles at nonprofits are more public now, which is a good thing, but it can create distrust that exists between donors and the organization. And if you're giving because you're what the organization is supposed to be doing at the end of the road, directly serving someone, the actual work, but the money is coming in and it's not all going to where you think it should be, or it's being mismanaged. Something like that seems like it would be worthwhile to stick around. You can still engage with a nonprofit organization and lower your donation. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. You can sort of send a message, but I think just stepping away, especially if you are someone who has a background in business or who has your own ability to maybe help them and guide them and provide advice through it. There are some organizations that the reason that they're mismanaged is just because they're understaffed, or they hired the wrong person for the job. It may not be actively malicious, sort of. And in that case, that's something that is fixable. For these larger organizations that have had sort of these national scandals, the nice thing about those is you can walk away. Like they don't need you necessarily. You know, they're getting a lot of donations, and there are so many excellent nonprofits out there that are doing a lot of times the same work or similar work, or these larger organizations are actually contracting with on the ground to do the work. So there are other options. And so for that type of organization, I would say sending a message by removing support is probably more effective. You need to tell them, though, because they're so big, they might not, I don't want to name names, but these national organizations, it's hard to get on their radar as a donor unless you're, one of their major donors. They're really just pulling in a lot of money from, a wide range of people, and I think it's much harder.
Just in a way, piggybacking on that, how much specific oversight is reasonable to expect as a donor, without trying to micromanage every aspect of, what I found often is I'm giving to something, I think it's in general what I want and consistent, and yet there can be a lot of kind of wrestling about exactly how they're doing and what matters to them, like how big a donation is enough that you might expect, to have more direct influence, and how much is it better to just back off and say, okay, it's more or less what I'm looking for.
Right. So again, I think a lot of it's the size of the organization. If it's a smaller organization, I think we have to have a little bit of grace. We know how much people who work for small nonprofits make and how much they're asked to do. They're not supported a lot. Their background, they may have a specific background that is more in the, like say it's an arts organization. They probably have an arts background, and they're also being asked to balance a spreadsheet. And they're trying to do, and then they're bringing in people, they're doing a lot of things. And so it may be that if you were to look at their books, you'd be like, ugh, like this is not necessarily how I would do this personally, but they are doing a good enough job. And maybe if it's something that I'm particularly concerned about, that might be a good place to make a gift. To say, what, I really would like for you to stop tracking things on pen and paper. And so would you be open to me giving a gift that in part was directed to upgrading your system, for instance? So there are certain ways that you as a donor can help make the systems better. However, from the bottom up, I think a top-down approach for a lot of nonprofits is not really that helpful, because it can get in the way of them doing the work. So there's help, and then there's sort of meddling. And you need to sort of walk that line. And everyone's books are open. That's the nice thing about nonprofits, is it's all public. I would just go back to, again, this sort of values-focused thing of, if this organization is doing something that at the end of the day is meaningful to me, I believe in their mission, I'm meeting with them, I'm meeting with someone who's received their services, and the work that's being done is good, that in a lot of ways is you're not going to get to 100% necessarily, but you're getting a lot of the ways there. And if you can identify things they can do better and support them in getting there, that's great too. Is that?
Yeah, I wasn't so much better or worse. Sometimes it's just, the more particulars about the actual program, or how they, a lot of institutes, they have their way of doing things, and that's how they want to do it.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, we like the money, and yes, we'll listen to you to a point, and then
Right.
we're going to do what we're going to do.
Right.
Which is fine. I mean, they
Yeah.
know more about it specifically than I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like a little wrestling, and I'm not sure, just personally, how much am I trying to get too involved here?
Right.
Versus, trying to get more consistent with what my values would be in this particular program.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of a dance. I would say too that if after a while you still sort of feel an underlying this isn't really getting what I'm hoping to achieve with my gift, with my charity, my funds, then I would also just say to keep looking. especially, in New York City, if you know, nothing, so there are so many organizations, new ones every day that are so it may be that if there's sort of a lingering discomfort, it may be that there's something else out there that might be better.
So I'm going to give our last question to Dr. Lax here, because he had his hand up, so this is on you, Bess. And then thereafter, obviously, feel free to ask questions directly to Bess and Maury. Bess helps advise families and organizations on these topics, so feel free to speak with her. And obviously, Maury works with all of our key clients on these matters as well.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I want you as my family advisor or my family therapist, actually, as I sort of sit here now. So you have an interesting background in that you've worked both sides of the street, right? You've raised money for a major organization and you've advised families. And, as someone who works for a not-for-profit, I have certain patients who want nothing to do with development. They run the other way. And there's some who want to engage in the way that you described. Can you talk about that and sort of how to handle that? I met with a foundation last week and they said to me, no development people, please, at this lunch. Maybe you could talk about that culture.
Yeah, so not unusual as someone who was a development officer. Not every, and as I will just say, in the confines of this room, I don't necessarily like all development officers, and I am one. That there are different people have different sort of strategies, and some people, click with people better than others. And I know that sometimes development can also feel pushy to the point of salesy. Sometimes, let's say, it's all coming from a good place. When you're in development, you are working sort of at the pleasure of your CEO, your dean, your whatever. You've got your things that you need to do in order to keep your job, and so you're kind of motivated. Some people are motivated just in that way. There are a lot of development people out there who understand that that is their role, but also understand that they're trying to build a relationship with a donor that will last and that is actually gratifying for them as well, because those are the ones that do go the distance. That's how you find your actual board members, is by engaging with people on what really interests them. So I will say that what you're describing is 100% true. A lot of donors do not like to work with development. As a development person, I will say I'm very good at working with development. So if you were interested in working with me, I could do that for you. And I also think that I know how to talk to development to get the opportunities that we talked about before earlier. I want to, get this family's interested in this. They need to come in. Who you, from a perspective of development, who should they meet with? Who is your exciting researcher right now in this field? How do we get them in the door? Development is really good at knowing what those opportunities are. They're really valuable in their knowledge of the institution. And I think sometimes what happens is you don't get past that first conversation because it can feel like they're just immediately wanting to talk about how much are we talking about here? How much can we give? And they're doing it because they want to know what sort of program you can support. A lot of times it's not just bringing in the money, but they're trying to get a sense of what is the gift? What could this gift be? So who should I be putting them with? Because at an institution like Cornell, but even smaller ones, there are programs of all different sizes. So they want to know, is this person looking to give $10,000 or $50,000? Because they're going to put you in touch with very different people. Sometimes that good intention cannot come across that way. And so I would just say, like with the giving the grace of the people who work at these small nonprofits, a development person is coming in with good intentions most of the time. Sometimes you do need to navigate that a little bit. And from one development person to another, I certainly am happy to do that on behalf of people that I'm working for. I get it.
So thank you, Bess. Thank you, Maury. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.